Ever fall into one of those YouTube rabbit holes?
Oh, totally.
You know, the ones that you're not really sure how you got there.
Yeah.
But you end up face to face with this video, and you just know it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah.
That's us today.
Okay.
We are diving deep into, can 25 liberal college students outsmart one conservative? Featuring, well, I would say firebrand,
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA.
Okay, so what's so interesting about this one, I think, even before you hit play, is
Yeah.
just the setup.
Yeah.
It's like they designed this to be almost like a visual metaphor for just the state of our political landscape. You've got Kirk, obviously, a leading voice in conservative circles, and he is surrounded by all these college students who self-identify as woke.
Right, so you kind of have to wonder going in, like, is genuine dialogue even possible?
Right, is this even gonna work?
Right, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
did they set this up just to, like, create, like, an explosion
It
of...
feels very intentional.
It does.
Yeah.
And they picked, like, all the hot button issues.
Yeah, they're all in there.
Like, right off the bat, we're dealing with abortion, the value of college.
Which, hot topic these days.
Huge, especially with, student debt and all of that.
Absolutely.
Trans rights, Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Like, nothing is off the table.
It's all in there.
So what we're going to try to do today is not just unpack the arguments themselves,
Okay.
but also look at whether or not
Right.
any common ground can be found.
Yeah. Can we get to some nuance here?
Right, exactly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all of like the fireworks, essentially.
Yeah, because I think that's maybe the even more important question.
Okay.
Not just can they find common ground, but can this type of debate, as common as it is these days,
Right.
actually help anything? Or does it just reinforce the divides?
So let's get right into it.
Okay.
Hit play, and it's like Kirk throws down a gauntlet.
Oh, yeah.
He says, abortion is murder and it should be illegal.
Wow.
No easing into it,
No,
right?
he's not messing around.
It's going right there.
And I think this is a good example of, we talk about trying to find common ground.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how do you do that when the argument is framed this way?
Right.
He's not just stating an opinion here. He's trying to frame the entire debate.
Yes.
And the language is very intentional, right?
Absolutely murder.
Yeah, you use a word like that, it injects this moral absolutism into it.
Yeah.
And it makes it very difficult to then have nuance.
Right. You're already starting from this place where it's like, if you don't agree, you're a monster.
Exactly.
And to their credit, the students,
yeah.
they push back on that immediately.
Okay.
They don't let that just sit there.
Right.
One student brings up the idea of self-defense.
Interesting.
Like there's a difference between killing and self-defense
Right.
and what we legally and morally define as murder.
I see. So they're trying to draw that distinction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where, we see that classic clash happening.
Right.
Personal convictions,
Yeah.
deeply held beliefs, butting up against legal and societal frameworks.
Right, because we have this framework for a reason.
Exactly. And, Kirk is coming at this very much from this, fetal personhood standpoint.
Okay.
He's talking about the heartbeat at 6 weeks, the presence of DNA.
So very much appealing to that, emotional,
Yes.
visceral understanding of when life begins.
And then he takes it even further.
Okay.
And he says, he actually brings up this hypothetical, and you can almost feel the temperature in the room rise when this happens.
Oh, here we go.
He uses the example of a 10-year-old girl who becomes pregnant
Okay.
through rape.
Wow.
And he says that even in that instance, he believes she should be obligated to carry to term.
Okay, so now we're getting really real.
Very real, very fast.
Yeah, and I imagine for some of the people in that room, this is
their reality.
very personal.
This is not just a philosophy debate. This is real life.
Right, this is not theoretical.
Exactly.
And I'm curious how the students respond to that, because that's a tough one.
They do push back.
Ugh.
Immediately, they start talking about the potential harm to the girl.
Yeah.
Not just physically, but emotionally.
Of course, she's 10.
10 years old.
Yeah.
So it's like this real clash between, whose rights are we prioritizing?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Whose rights are more important in that situation? And, it's interesting how this ties into a lot of the arguments you hear from, more conservative circles about college in general.
Right, like the whole liberal bias.
Exactly. Like, is it really about the 10-year-old? Or is this part of a larger argument about,
About the institution itself.
Yeah, like, has college become this kind of echo chamber?
Right, where you're not actually challenging ideas. You're just being indoctrinated.
Right.
And I think that's something that, a lot of people resonate with.
Oh, absolutely.
regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum. Like,
Yeah, and the students do push back on that. They talk about the value of, personal growth, critical thinking,
sure.
those kinds of things.
So more of the kind of like holistic benefits.
Right, exactly.
Not just like, did you get a job?
Yeah.
But like, did you become a better human?
Right. Like, did you learn how to think critically?
Right.
How to, engage with ideas that are different from your own?
Exactly. And there's one student, she's a psych major, and she makes a really interesting point.
She's like, look, I'm not going to be an engineer, right? Like, my field is not,
Right, not a direct line.
it's not a direct line to a six-figure salary right out of school.
Right.
But she argues that the skills she's learning, like communication, critical thinking, understanding, like human behavior.
Yeah, that's valuable in any field.
And she's like, this stuff is valuable everywhere.
It's that whole liberal arts argument, right?
Totally.
Like, you're not just becoming a robot who can, like, do one specific thing.
Right, you're becoming a well-rounded person.
Exactly.
Which, in theory, should make you a more valuable employee, right?
Right.
But, Kirk is not buying it.
No.
He kind of scoffs at that, and he's like, look, tuition costs are out of control. Student loan debt is crippling people.
And he has a point.
He's not wrong, right?
Like, you can't just, like, wave a magic wand to make that disappear.
Exactly. And so he's saying, for a lot of people, college is not this,
This, like, golden ticket.
Yeah, it's actually a detriment.
Right, you're starting your life in debt.
Exactly.
And he even compares it to, like, those, those, like, scammy ads you see online, like the male enhancement pills and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like, college is like that. It's promising you the world.
Right. But will it deliver?
Exactly.
And that's where I think, there is some potential for common ground because they're kind of talking past each other, but they both agree that there's a problem.
With the cost.
The cost, the lack of clear career paths.
Especially in certain fields.
Right. Like, not everyone's going to come out of college and be a software engineer making $200,000 a year.
Right. Exactly.
So I think the conversation should be less about, is college good or bad?
Right.
And more about, how can we make it work better?
Right. How can we fix the system?
Exactly.
Okay. So moving on.
Yeah, because we've got, a million other things to unpack here.
We do.
He does not shy away from any of the hot button issues.
No.
So next up.
Let's talk about trans rights.
Okay.
Because Kirk comes right out and says, trans women are not women.
So, again, very bold statement.
Very direct.
Not mincing words.
No.
And this is where, he's drawing a very clear line, and he's grounding his argument in, biological essentialism.
Right. So he's basically saying
Biology is destiny.
that if you are born with XX chromosomes, you're a woman, XY, you're a man. End of story.
End of story. That's it.
No room for nuance. Exactly.
And this is where, of course, the students are ready to jump in, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because they are coming at it from a very different perspective.
Right. They're talking about gender identity being different from biological sex.
Right. They're bringing in the idea of self-identification.
Lived experiences.
Yeah, your lived experience matters.
It's not just about what your birth certificate says.
Exactly. And I think what they're trying to do is advocate for a more expansive understanding of gender.
Right. It's not just this binary.
It's not just two boxes.
Right.
And they're saying that, social constructs matter, individual expression matters.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because one of the students challenges Kirk to define woman.
Oh, I love when that happens.
Right. Like, okay, you keep using this word.
Define it.
But what do you mean? And it becomes this back and forth about chromosomes versus self-identification.
So, what carries more weight?
Right, exactly.
And, Kirk, he takes it even further.
Oh.
He compares gender to a theatrical performance.
Oh, wow.
It's all an act.
And that's got to be really frustrating.
For the students who...
this is their lived reality.
This is their life. This is not a game.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember, right?
Yeah.
We're not just debating these things in the abstract.
Right.
This has real implications for people.
Real world consequences.
Right. How people are treated, the rights they have.
And the students try to bring that up.
Okay.
They're like, look, for trans people, this isn't a performance.
Right.
This is about aligning how they present with who they know themselves to be.
And that's essential to their well-being.
Exactly.
It's not just a costume. It's not just for fun.
Right. It's not a phase.
Exactly.
And then one of the students brings up a really interesting point.
Okay.
Intersex people. Talk about throwing a wrench in the whole chromosome argument.
Right, because suddenly it's not so simple anymore.
Not so binary.
Exactly.
Like, what do you do when someone is born with variations in their sex characteristics?
Right, it challenges that whole foundation.
That he's built his whole argument on.
Exactly, and it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that.
Well, spoiler alert, he doesn't really...
Oh, no.
He kind of just brushes it off.
Like it's just an exception to the rule.
Yeah, like it's this rare thing that doesn't really change the bigger picture.
But it does, though. Like, that's the point.
That's the whole point.
It challenges the whole premise.
Okay, so we're seeing this pattern again.
What's that?
Kirk is sticking to this very black and white view.
Okay.
And the students are like, but wait, there's all this gray area.
Nuance.
Nuance, exactly.
So are we going to talk about Kamala Harris?
It's like we've kind of moved beyond just these individual issues.
Right.
And we're really at the heart of like this kind of like national conversation.
The big one.
The big one about like, how do we even talk about this stuff?
How do we acknowledge the past?
Right.
Without getting stuck.
Without it being a blame game.
Yes, exactly. Like, how do we have a conversation about, race and equality where we're not just immediately like on the defensive?
Right. Or accusing each other of like playing the race card.
Exactly. And that's
tough.
It's really hard. It's like walking a tightrope.
And speaking of tightrope walk.
Oh, no. What did he say now?
Kirk then makes this statement.
Okay.
That is just like...
Hit me.
He suggests that Black Americans are worse off today than they were in the 1950s.
Wow. Okay, so that's...
It's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack there.
It is.
And, I'm sure for a lot of people listening, that's just like a mind-blowing statement.
Yeah, like how can you even...
Where do you even begin to unpack that?
And he does try to back it up.
Okay.
He talks about, obviously he acknowledges the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
And, some of those legislative victories.
Sure. Progress has been made.
But then he argues that, like, social welfare programs, affirmative action, things like that, have actually been detrimental to the Black community.
So he's saying that, like, these programs...
He's saying they create a culture of dependence.
Got it.
And that they actually hinder self-reliance.
Okay. And I've heard this argument before.
It's out there.
It's out there, and I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But it's also important to kind of like...
To look at it critically.
Yes, and to remember that it is just one interpretation.
Right. It's not the only way to see this.
Exactly. And the students are like right on top of this.
Oh, yeah.
They're not letting that slide.
No, they're like, hold on a second. Have you seen the economic disparities?
Right. Like, let's look at the actual numbers.
They're talking about poverty, unemployment, lack of access to health care.
Which are all tied to systemic issues.
Exactly. And they're like, this isn't just some, like, abstract thing.
Right. These are people's lives.
This is real life.
Exactly.
And you can't just erase decades, centuries of
oppression.
Of oppression, yeah.
Just by saying, okay, well, now it's illegal to discriminate.
Right. Like, that doesn't magically fix everything.
No, it doesn't undo the harm that was done.
Okay, so I'm listening to all of this.
Yeah.
And it's like both sides are making some valid points.
Okay.
Like, I'm not saying I agree with everything everyone's saying.
Right.
But I can see where they're coming from.
It's like they're both looking at the same picture.
Yes.
But they're focused on different parts of it.
Different details, yeah.
Different brushstrokes.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole thing. It's like a microcosm of
how we talk to each other.
Or how we don't talk to each other.
Right, like we shout past each other.
You're so busy trying to be right.
Yes.
That we forget to actually listen.
So is that it? Are we just doomed to...
Doomed? No, I don't like that word.
Okay.
I think, like I said, awareness is the first step.
Okay.
Just recognizing that this is how we're approaching these conversations.
That we already have our minds made up.
Exactly. We're not really open to changing them.
So maybe the goal shouldn't be to win the argument.
Right.
But to actually understand.
Maybe it's about asking better questions.
Oh, I like that.
Instead of just trying to, like, hit people with our talking points.
Yeah, like what if we actually listen to the answers?
Imagine that.
Even when they make us uncomfortable.
Especially when they make us uncomfortable.
Ooh, that's good stuff. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
But for everyone listening, don't let the conversation end here.
Yeah, keep thinking about this.
What's one conversation you've been avoiding?
Ooh, good one.
Or one viewpoint you haven't really considered?
Food for thought.
Food for thought. Until next time.